Now, still on the coronavirus story, people arriving in Wales and Scotland from Portugal must now self-isolate for 14 days, but the rules covering England and Northern Ireland have not changed. The rules for Wales apply from 4 o'clock tomorrow morning, while in Scotland they begin 24 hours later on Saturday morning. Cases of coronavirus in Portugal have been rising in the past week, and some of the biggest names in British aviation have accused the UK government of a lack of leadership, and they're calling on ministers to approve coronavirus tests at airports to give people the confidence to travel. Our transport correspondent Tom Burridge has the story.
People were heading out to Greece from Edinburgh this afternoon, even though they'll have to quarantine when home.
I work from home, I can self-isolate for 14 days and I'm totally happy to do that.
I go through a big operation when I get back home, so we really wanted to go on holiday.
But people in Greece now who live in Scotland aren't so happy.
I'm flying back to Glasgow. It's got an infection rate of 21, I believe. I'm coming from a country that's got an infection rate of 15. So I'm going back from a country that's got a lower rate than the country I'm going back to. But yet I have to isolate.
But the Welsh government has decided that Zakynthos and 5 other Greek islands pose a risk. People in Wales will only have to self-isolate if they return from those parts of the country. There is still no quarantine for the whole of Greece if you live in England or Northern Ireland. As travelling abroad gets more complicated, it's really quiet at Heathrow. But aviation bosses say the government could change that by bringing in testing for COVID at airports. But the facility already built at Heathrow isn't being used because it doesn't have the government's backing. A passenger arriving into the UK will have booked a test online. They would then provide a saliva swab test to a trained nurse. They should get the results of that test within 24 hours, and they would be given a kit so they could do a second test at home in several days. 2 negative results would cut your quarantine period short. The UK government says tests can give false results.
Week in, week out, we lose more destinations.
But the man in charge of airports in Glasgow, Aberdeen and Southampton says without a policy to kickstart some travel, the sector faces ruin.
Quite frankly, I think at this moment in time, the UK government is overseeing the demise of the aviation industry in the UK. We are seeing more job losses than we did in the demise of the coal industry in the 80s. That surely cannot be an accolade that any government would like to have.
Portugal's infection rate has risen beyond the UK government's benchmark. But tonight, a surprise, it will not be added to the quarantine list for England. Some had already changed their holiday plans.
We heard when we were at the beginning of the week that possibly Portugal would go back. And so we had one friend who absolutely couldn't risk having to go into quarantine, so she had to buy a very expensive flight and she left this morning.
But the Welsh and Scottish governments are adding mainland Portugal to their quarantine lists. Working out who has to self-isolate after a trip abroad isn't a relaxing affair. Tom Burridge, BBC News.